Good afternoon. Welcome to Arendal. Welcome to the first of the events that the Peace Research Institute of Oslo is hosting over the next few days. We have a fantastic array of debates and insights from our researchers to share with you, and we look forward to hearing your views as well. My name is Simon Reed-Henry. I'm a research professor at the PRIO. I'm also an honorary research professor at the University of London, and it's a pleasure to be here today to take you and our guests on the panel this afternoon through what I think is an incredibly timely and important discussion, which is not simply a recognition that the world is changing around us. It's a question of how do we navigate that moment? How does a country like Norway best move itself forward amidst what I think we can all agree are very choppy waters? Now, the cause of this turbulence is not simply the Trump effect. Alliances, traditional alliances are straining all around the world, and whichever sector you look at, whether it's in peace and security, whether it's in international development, or whether it's in trade and economic affairs, the old world order is falling apart, but what is emerging to replace it? Now, addressing that question inevitably for all actors involves trade-offs. But how do we manage those trade-offs? How do we navigate them? Do we go it alone? Do we form coalitions of the willing and push forward our particular agendas in whichever space we think they can most gain traction? Or do we try to create new, larger groupings where some of the spirit of collective action of the immediate post-Cold War era might possibly come to fruition again in a new form? These are difficult questions. One way of assessing them, a way that I often turn to, is to look at history. We can look back to the Cold War, some of you may remember that, where in the early 1950s, in 1955, in Bandung, the so-called non-aligned powers tried to meet to navigate a middle pathway for them through the bilateral intransigency of what was then the Cold War. Or we could look to 1974, where again, under the banner of the new international economic order, again a series of quote-unquote middle powers tried to arrest the movement and the process that was gaining power in a direction that they felt they couldn't control, and they sought to introduce new principles, new rules, and they sought to do that through the United Nations. Now, neither of those two efforts to transform the world in a self-conscious manner from the point of view of middle-income powers or middle powers really worked, but they give us lessons for how we might navigate the same moment today. And there are questions, of course, as to who we are. Another way to look at what is happening, to try to understand how we move forward in that context, is to look at the numbers. You know, we've had two world leaders over the last few months who have tried to put a framework around the changes they're seeing all about us today. Mark Carney in January talked about what he called a values-based pragmatism. And just a couple of months later at the Raisina Dialogue in India, Alexander Stubb of Finland, again from this same region as we're speaking today, sought to try to do the same, to talk about a pragmatism of the middle powers. But what I want to get us into today is what are middle powers, what can they do, and what does that pragmatic order look like to go forward? We've got a fantastic panel to answer some of these questions with you. I'm going to bring them up onto the stage now. First of all, if I can ask you to come up in the order in which I'll ask you your questions. Ole Jakob Sending, who is Research Director and Director of the Centre for Geopolitics at NUPI. We have Gunn Juri Roseth, who is the Director of NORAD, the Norwegian Development Agency. Thank you for being here today. We have Toril Pedersen, who is the Director of the UNDP Global Governance Centre in Oslo. And last but not least, we have Maria Gabrielsen-Jumbert, who is a senior researcher, a colleague of mine at PRIO. Thank you all of you for joining us today. I look forward to hearing you squirm under the skies of the questions we're going to be putting to you. And Ole Jakob, you get the chance to squirm first. Tell me, what are middle powers? Is it a meaningful term to use? Does it help us move things forward? And if there is such a thing as a middle power, what can it do? Are there differences in the foreign policy it can pursue? Are there differences in the kinds of alliances it can form? I know you've been thinking about these and related questions from the Centre for Geopolitics, but I'd love to hear your thoughts to get us started and to begin the discussion. Ole Jakob.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation. So middle powers are, well, by definition, not great powers. So let's just start there. And they're not small powers. I think outside of Norway, Norway is not considered a middle power. But for the sake of this discussion, let's assume that Norway is a middle power. One typically thinks of Brazil, India, Indonesia, larger countries than smaller European countries. What characterizes middle powers are basically two things, but there is huge variation depending on regional and political context. The first, of course, is that by being middle powers, they are more dependent on others than great powers. So the first is more focus on alliances, and that can take the form of binding alliances like NATO, or it can take another form where you try to play both sides and have a more non-aligned strategy, as many states tried during the Cold War. So alliances is one thing. The other is a much more heavy reliance on rules and norms. The weaker you are in the system, of course, the more you are dependent on rules and institutions, because that is what protect you against larger and more powerful states. Now, if we think about the role of middle powers today, I think it is becoming actually, it's talked about more. You mentioned Carney and Stubb. I think the fact that they brought this up is a reflection of a hope and a political ambition more than it reflects actual political realities, because the rivalry between the US and China and the technological developments and economic developments in those two economies, these two states, are so overwhelmingly important for all other states. So the space for agency, for independent, autonomous foreign policy has shrunk. Now, of course, with the Trump administration, you see efforts to take down the dependence on the US for US allies. That also has costs, of course. And so I think for a middle power like Norway, we are, in one sense, more constrained because of the dependence on the US. So that dependence has now become much more of an acute potential vulnerability, depending on what Trump decides from one day to the other. And we've seen that with tariffs and so on. So that's one thing. The other is, of course, that creates a push for creating some sort of agency and creating more autonomy, finding common ground with other middle powers, and that is also going on. But I think if you look at the brute facts, unfortunately, that push to create space for middle powers will not be sufficient to move away from the dependence and the balancing between the great powers.
Fantastic. And I mean, you already mentioned a couple of things here that are so important: rules, norms, a system in which both of those things can be embedded. Now, of course, I think what we're already understanding is that for the middle power problem to be relevant for Norway, Norway doesn't have to be or consider itself even a middle power. This is a moment that Norway has to navigate regardless. And Gunjuri, this is something that is absolutely happening in the world of development cooperation. Jakob's been talking a bit about geopolitical issues, but in development cooperation, the development minister Aukrust has recently said it's a priority for Norway to engage, for example, with Gulf states, so what many would consider new and emerging powers in the region, but also as global actors in the sphere of international development cooperation. So my question to you is, how do their interests, norms, rules differ to ours? And how can Norway manage what potentially many would think of as the tensions in some of those relationships? Because absolutely, to answer Ole Jakob's point, partnerships at least are key.
No, thank you. And I'm happy that I don't have to do the definition, practice of being a middle power or not. And I think, of course, within the sphere of development assistance, we might in some context also be seen as quite a large, if not a power, but an actor. So we have some, weight when it comes to rallying around thematic or geographic priorities within the humanitarian long term. So I think to start my answer to your question is also reflecting a little bit on picking up what Ole Jakob said, that what are sort of the like-minded countries that we work with now, because everything was sort of tossed a bit up in the air also when it comes to priorities, both when it comes to thematic priorities within development assistance, but also if development assistance is something that we should do or not, and even if the SDGs is something that we should sort of keep on pursuing. And I'm of course thinking maybe about the one large player within development assistance that that United States have been, and both sort of within the rallying, the normative, but also with where the money has been put forward. So I think with that as a starting point for us, having our sort of norms and values as a basis for the Norwegian development assistance, it's absolutely necessary to go out and map and have really in-depth discussions with countries who are still committed to maintaining a high level of development assistance. So I think in that light, it's a good idea and a wise idea to then have closer engagement with, for example, the Gulf countries. Many of them who have been donors for, as many years as Norway, but maybe with a different approach. And then we have dilemmas when it comes to the very, very sort of core of our development assistance. It could be gender equality, it could be with sexual reproductive health and rights, within human rights. And that discussions, they are ongoing also in the political track. But when I meet with them, for example, visiting Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Fund for Development, everything that frames what they do is based on the Sustainable Development Goals. So as a starting point for a joint discussion, we already share something in common. And they would like to learn from us how we work results-based, evidence-based. We can learn a lot from how they work on blended finance. So I think it's about to maintaining, that ring around the fire camp of countries who are committed to long-term development assistance, because the whole notion of this is something we should do or not has also come up. So maybe that was a bit of a long answer to the question, but I think just also to say that of course our closest partners are still our Nordic friends, some European development partners, but coming back to what I started, we see that the cuts in fundings, they come across the board also in Europe. So we need to be able to have a conversation of priorities also with countries where we don't see eye to eye on everything. Yeah.
I think this last point is key, and for me, for many who work in this space, I think the last 18 months has been strongly a moment of trying to weather the storm, trying to sort of find our feet in a context where things are changing often quite rapidly. The US is one part of that, and the USAID cut in your sphere of development cooperation is part of that. But I think it goes more broadly as well. I wonder, though, whether, and you, Gunnjord, began to sort of hint at this, are there then potentially some opportunities for a country like Norway that has worked in a very particular way, very successfully, but as things change around it, if we are bold and brave enough to move and change with that, are there opportunities for us? And Toril, I'll come to you now because, from the point of view of the Global Governance Center and UNDP, you see changes across the broader multilateral system, across the UN, also in the sphere of development, but now thinking a bit more broadly in terms of multilateral affairs as well. Is there, as you see it, are there some concrete opportunities that countries like Norway can pursue? Are there opportunities for, call them middle powers, to come together in new ways? Now we don't have the leadership perhaps from the US, even though we have certain elements, not least the use of force from the US. What do you see as being more positive points on the horizon, if there are any?
Yeah, no, I think there are opportunities, and let me get to that. But if we just step back a little bit, I think the multilateral system and the UN in particular is really made for moments like this. At least it emerged from moments like this. To find a pragmatic road in the middle of polarizing powers, etc. So if we seize the moment and not try to make the UN something it's not meant to be, then I think there are opportunities. The middle powers, like we're saying, have traditionally also been the biggest supporters of the United Nations system. recognizing that they have a lot to gain from investing, even if what they've identified as gains might be different, whether if you're from Brazil or if you're from Norway. But that is something that we have to make sure we capitalize in, and we have to turn it into something, a concrete response, rather than just a philosophical and a sort of a geopolitical rhetoric. The system is in crisis, like you're saying. There's a deep decline in trust. There's also a deep decline in funding, both for the core of the political elements, but also for the development arms and the humanitarian arms, which is it's also kind of a complex crisis. I think it's important also that we see that this same declining trust that is in the multilateral governance system is happening in countries. And that mirroring of the declining trust is kind of magnified by this lack of funding. We know that trust comes from being able to deliver on what's expected that you deliver. In countries, it's delivering services. In the UN, is also to be able to articulate what is the solution and the way out of this. So I think there are three kind of elements that we can look at, or Norway can look towards, to play an even more visible and forceful role in this navigating the way forward. So first of all, we see that a lot of countries are really looking for opportunities not to choose sides. They want to choose solutions. They want to find together, and we see a lot of new alliances, non-traditional alliances. And I think that's something that we can have a much more deliberate response to, or try to cultivate a bit more. For instance, the way Norway navigated the UN tax convention process, right? There's unconventional allies on the political side, also working with the development side to make sure that there is capacity to implement, and that's a long-term process. We can see it from Brazil and South Africa in taking the leadership on the inequality agenda. Even if it's in the G20, it's been brought into a UN discussion now, with also some unconventional partners and taking a lot of space. Africa Group in the General Assembly are also taking leadership and demanding a lot more decisions being taken in that open space. But I also think there is untapped potential on the development side and the humanitarian side. We spend a lot of time and effort looking at the political processes in General Assembly, ECOSOC, and the Security Council. But Norway is a very big player in the boards of big organizations, which frequently has. It's not always the most strategic discussions there, and connecting those discussions in the boards back to the Norwegian civil society, making sure that there is more engagement leading into those. I think that's an untapped potential that we can think about more. And then lastly, this is a governance challenge. Norway has governance as its capital. It has become almost like a governance capital in itself, in the sense that you're hosting a lot of key governance institutions here, the IDI, Intosai, our center, and a lot of experience that can be built on. So I think this is also a potential of showing that this middle ground has clear solutions, leaning forward into those solutions, linking it with values and rules-based order. I think that's a big potential, because right now people and countries are looking for solutions, and it's from solutions and services we can build trust, not from describing the problem.
And I think, thanks, Toril. I think you say something important here too about the vectors of power. It's not simply military force. It's not even necessarily always economic might. It can be sitting on boards. It can be influencing the decision-making processes in the places where they need to happen. Maria, to bring the conversation to you then, we've moved through from the problem of geopolitics to development cooperation, and now thinking through the multilateral system. But as Toril was saying towards the end there, if we approach this from the bottom up, and I think we have to connect the two, I agree with you, What does it look like then on the ground for people in Norway or any other country where we're being asked to support with taxpayer money these agendas, these initiatives, the boards in which we have to sit on? How is that dynamic changing in the current context? Are we losing a sense amongst the populations that these are issues we need to care about and we should be invested in? Come to events like this. Thank you. Congratulations, all of you. Or is it that we need to move on and change the language, change the narrative about what it is we're trying to sell?
Well, thank you for that question. I think that's an important aspect to bring into this discussion as well, that there is a strong expectation of delivering humanitarian aid to some of the worst humanitarian crises and where the needs are the largest. And so despite this context of more pragmatism, more hostility, more violations of international humanitarian law, even in the midst of these contexts, we still see that a protection and an expectation from the bottom up, in a way, for both from constituencies, but also from partners who, even in the most strained relations, they will still expect their counterparts to have at least a minimum common respect for the life-saving programs or for protecting international humanitarian law. And I say that despite the fact that we have been through a few years now of some of the most blatant violations of international humanitarian law being carried out without sort of even trying to cover up what is happening in front of our eyes. One example to illustrate this is, as we saw and followed the dismantlement of USAID over a few weeks, even in that context, which really showed sort of a blatant, in a way, disregard for all the new consequences that the cutting off of those funds and those programs created, there was still, even in that context, even from the Trump administration, a defense that, but we will maintain some of the core life-saving programs. Of course, we can right away also criticize that, because what are the life-saving programs when you are creating a lot of new humanitarian needs with all the programs that were cut? But even in those contexts, there is still a sense of some kind of basic life-saving programs need to be there. I'm also working on for instance, the search and rescue law at sea. So even in the context where all the parties want different things, but there is some kind of common understanding. Another example is even in the most strained relations, then the International Committee of the Red Cross will still have its role in negotiating the delivery of hostages between Gaza and Israel, for instance. So there's still some common, and then we need to work from that, because I think that can also tell us something in a context where we have the feeling that all kinds of basic principles around international cooperation are falling apart. So there is something to maintain there. The next point is also that there is an expectation to protect this from our constituencies. It is often being said in the context of development aid being cut back now that taxpayers are also demanding to see results, are demanding to see what is actually coming out of this funding. But I really also would like maybe just to push back a little bit on that narrative, because I think there is a strong support in Norway, but also in a lot of other countries, for our taxpayers' money to also still be used to some of those programs, and that is also at the core of our international solidarity tissues that bind us together. To illustrate, the most recent EU Barometer survey that surveys European public opinions showed that about European foreign aid, humanitarian aid, shows that 9 out of 10 of the respondents think it is still very important that very important and important, that the EU continues to deliver humanitarian aid. What is also interesting is that a large majority of the respondents also say that they think it is better or more useful, beneficial that the EU countries do this together rather than that single countries do this separately. So that's also an indicator of not just this do-good, we want them to continue to be there in the moments of the worst crisis, but there's a willingness also of the EU to play that role, to continue to see the multilateral cooperation exist. So a brief point also on this. So despite the fact that the humanitarian values are being the most challenged and the most violated, they all are also, and the fact that they still also have this idea that you can put up and say something is humanitarian, but being used for other purposes also makes it very, very vulnerable to being abused for other purposes. But despite that, we see that there is a support for maintaining some common denominators here. So I think that's something to depart from, also when we discuss other broader programs of cooperation. I'll briefly insert an addition to the definition, just with a brief anecdote on middle powers, and that just to share with you that I'm just coming home from France from a research stay there, and in the context of us organizing a meeting later this fall with some French researchers and French diplomats, when they heard that we are coming from Norway, the French diplomats and researchers suggested, why don't we have then as a theme how middle powers, so France and Norway as middle powers, are navigating this new system. So I just want to illustrate that it may be strategic, it's maybe something cool to be these days, to be a middle power, because they don't want to be the great power, they want to be in the group of the middle powers who are setting a new standard.
That's great. I can see the headlines already now, Maria. Norway acknowledges it is a middle power. It's okay. Okay, look, I want to get you all to talk a little bit more to each other now, because that's often where I think we get the best material. Gunjuri, I want to come back to you first. Maria's been saying a lot of important things around what it means from the point of view of upholding those norms and values. You mentioned them yourself in our engagements with other countries, including the Gulf states. What do you see as the non-negotiables there? I'm thinking back to the Deputy Foreign Minister. You, of course, come from the Foreign Ministry previously. Mentioned last year that the rules, if nobody upholds the rules don't mean anything for anybody. So what's Norway's role and its capacity in upholding those rules, and what are the non-negotiables for us as we go out into this, brave new world?
Yes, no, I think I touched upon it when we talked about the need to align with new partners, but we have to do it based on our priorities, our long-term commitment. So first of all, I think the point of just being very clear that we will provide development assistance. It's still, across the floor in Parliament and agreement, the percentage might sort of vary from party to party on how much, but that Norway should sort of remain committed. So that I think that is sort of a statement in itself. And I think for us, and I've seen over the last couple of years and also this year in this post, that when we talk about gender equality, sexual reproductive health and rights, it could be also human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of media, we tend to be quite alone on the stage as Norway. So where we used to have a larger group of countries who were also willing to be quite, blunt and tough and challenging on stage on these issues, also from a sort of bureaucratic perspective, when I'm sort of speaking on behalf of Norwegian priorities, and suddenly there's only Norway left in a way. So I think we are sort of aware that we will remain committed and have that base for our engagement. So I think that we can be able to be recognized as somebody who sort of stands firm on those priorities. It's important. But I think I would also like to raise another part of that question is, and it's not, and you talked about, a decline of trust internationally, also within Norway, when it comes to what do we use it for, why is it important that we remain committed, should it be sort of out of solidarity, of self-interest, a combination, but to be also a country where we spend the money is based on transparent decision-making processes. And I think we've seen in organizations that has nothing to do with development and systems that lately, this last week, that to be transparent about how decisions are made is important. So I think although development assistance will always be, highly political, there's a political decision to what to prioritize, there's also sort of politics involved in getting involved in countries. But that we base the decisions on where to spend the Norwegian money on, knowledge, on evidence, and that, people can sort of track where we have made the decisions that led to that disbursement in a way. So I think to remain committed on the principle, but also transparency in the decision making, and to share that knowledge with other partners is very important. And I think on the humanitarian also, of course, we need to remain very clear on being a donor that provides flexible, principled humanitarian assistance, that we speak up for the international humanitarian law whenever, wherever, and always. Yeah.
I think my job is moderator, so I'm not allowed to step in with my own views here. But I've certainly been one of those that's been arguing that we need to better define the specific things we're doing so we can do each of them better, rather than trying to be a little bit of everything. And I think what you're talking to there makes some sense with that. But Maria, my question back to you then is that answer good enough? Is Norway doing enough? And are we even in the right space here when we're talking about what middle powers can do, if the reality, and it hasn't come up yet, but maybe it should have done, is regionalism? Maybe the reality is that Latin America works on Latin America's issues, that Africa works on Africa's issues. Is that not a viable future, and does that make any sense in terms of how a global humanitarian system would work?
Yeah. That's also a good question. I'll start with the first one on Norway's. You said it very well, like Norway's position on the stage, and that you feel that we're more alone on that stage on some of these issues now. And I think that's also a sort of a picture to depart from, and perhaps it is then more difficult to stand alone then on that stage, but that is even more important now that Norway takes that space, and that we stand there. And I think there are others also expecting us to do so, and there are perhaps also others somewhere on that stage, but they haven't really stepped forward yet. And I think that we see it a little bit in some different areas of the different political agendas now. That perhaps that is an effect of this moment that we are in, that Norway is also looking to what are other EU countries doing in the field of migration, what are the European countries doing on Ukraine, naturally, of course. But I think it's also important that we can also take a lead here and set a standard. And if we step forward and embrace and remind of those ideals and those values that have always been so important for Norway. And right now, Norway is also working on on rethinking its development aid, its approach to development aid with the Vendepunkt agenda. I think this is a good moment to really think in ambitious ways about how Norway can continue to stand on that stage, even if it feels a little bit lonely. But then I think that others will also want to have conversations with us about how to reframe and reset that stage and that agenda. And you asked about regionalism. I think that's also maybe something. Maybe I'll depart from sort of that seeing how important the Nordics are. It has always been, but as we see that on different political agendas now as well. That checking in with and coordinating with the other Nordic countries is important for Norway, and I think that doesn't necessarily have to mean that we will only focus on Nordic issues and the African Union will only focus on African Union issues. But there's something about building also a strategic, not just alliance, but a common understanding to then stand stronger when advancing different important global agendas afterwards.
Yep. Okay, so now I'm reframing the headline, and now it's Norway accepts to become a middle power alone. Well, Jakob, I'm going to come back to you very briefly because you said some important things at the start. But Toril, at this point, I can't not come back to you because you are our speaker representing the UN to an extent today, or certainly coming from that point of view. It won't have escaped anyone's attention that we're in the middle of a new Secretary General selection process. It hopefully won't have escaped your attention that this is going to be one that is expected to be from a region, Latin America, I mentioned it, where predominantly middle powers exist, and that it's supposed to be a female candidate for the first time. Now, a lot can happen. I'm not going to ask you any particularly political points on the SG selection process, but I do want to ask you the principal point around what does that mean if, in January, the new SG is somebody who represents a very different set of interests, which align with what we've been talking about, the importance of norms, an SG who would potentially, hopefully, stand by the role of the UN. As you said, it was designed for these moments. Let's see. What do you see as the likely impact of a new SG of a different character, maybe a different caliber, stepping into the role in January?
It's going to be a very exciting season, candidate season. I think is kind of officially launching at the UNGA later this in September. Although we know the candidates that have been announced, and like you say, they have a representation. There's a strong chance that there's a candidate from Latin America. There is a very strong desire from very many countries that it should be female SG, but it's not a given, right? This is it's very much a time for member states to really step forward and define what kind of leader is it that the UN needs now. Is it a crisis manager? Is it a technocrat? Is it a systems reformer? And how much should that weigh vis-a-vis the geographical representation and the gender considerations? And I think this process is going to be very critical for many reasons, right? It's going to define a little bit of what's the future, how inclusive, open is this process going to be. It's going to set, I think, a bit of standard for how the UN operates post then the selection of the SG. There is also that push and pull, right, between the General Assembly wanting to take more of a space, the Security Council wanting it to have a bit more closer roles. I think also that decision is going to also determine a lot of the outcome. But having a middle power country isn't also, I mean, I don't know how much that is going to really define the space for middle powers in the UN process. Is really, I think, that space has to be defined more directly by member states in terms of who they're looking to lead the UN, and also the way that they're looking for that selection to be. That, I think, is going to be critical for that space. But it's a really exciting moment, and I think it's. If we get this wrong, you know, if the process doesn't inspire confidence, if it's seen like there's some sort of deal being made behind the scenes, that is something that it could really be very dramatic, I think, for the future of the UN. So.
Just to, I mean, we talked about the importance of norms and systems in this world where non-hegemonic powers have to also navigate their futures. But I mean, you take the SDGs then, we're not going to meet the SDGs. It's going to be, by many people's standards, a big failure. So one question for the new SDG would indeed be, will they stand by that norm that has structured so many decisions, so much cooperation, so many multilateral partnerships, or will we think about something different? I mean, that could potentially be one way where seeing the SDGs from the point of view of a non-traditional donor-type state might be relevant. But Tori, you also mentioned something that brings us back to you, Ole Jakob. You said it's time for member states to step up. So,
yes.
Ole Jakob,
yes.
how can Norway step up? Given all we've discussed, and we're not quite done with everybody yet, because I'm going to come back to each of you for a quick lightning round at the end. But given all that we've discussed, what is the sort of foreign policy opportunity space, as it were, for a country like Norway? Forget whether it's a middle power or not, but we've established that these issues are nonetheless relevant for Norway. What are the opportunities ahead as you see it, and potentially what are some of those trade-offs?
So the opportunities, I tend to think of it more negatively, so that we have. You're
an academic.
Yes.
so
we have been playing offense for a very, very long time because of stable framework conditions. Now we are forced to play defense, I think. Yep. So much more money and political capital, I think, will have to be spent on just preserving the most important elements of the system that we live with today. So that's one thing. The other is, and that has some implications, I think, also for how one thinks about development assistance. I think that foreign policy and development policy will grow closer together. Part of the reason I say that is that if you start prioritizing development policy by issue area, so health, climate, poverty reduction, etc., that's one way, and that's the focus primarily on efficiency. So in an ideal world, that should be the focus, maximize poverty reduction. If you think about it more in foreign policy terms, you start with what countries do we need a strong partnership with, and then go from that list and then align that list of countries with thematic areas. Because you have allies, so you can't have climate as an ally. You can't have Brazil as an ally, or India. So I think that type of logic will kick in. And then I think that we will see, for Norway's part, because it's a very, very small middle power, depending on what issue area you talk about.
Or if you ask France.
We will, the issue of middle power's role is also tricky because of lack of leadership.
Right.
So take Europe, France, Germany, who is going to take the lead? And that's part of the reason the US is so important for Europe, is that everybody knows it's the US that takes the lead on security issues. So in that space, there are lots of opportunities for new allies, etc. But it will not, I think, be sufficient to build new institutions to strengthen existing ones if you do not have also the great powers on board. So that's the major challenge as far as I can tell.
And you say major powers there, but what about, and you mentioned as well, Brazil. So in the climate space,
Yes.
I would count Brazil as a leader. Brazil
Absolutely.
is not only stepping into those boards and trying to change things in the way that Tora was describing,
Yep.
it's funding a huge international core of diplomats to go out and do Brazil's work, to put Brazil's views across. And it's incredibly influential also in spheres like the G20, you know, where Brazil really changed what the outcome was last year relative to what the discussion was going into that year-long process of, you know, middle power discussion. So do you think also then that means in a foreign policy context, because I buy your argument that you can either do it thematically or you can do it based around your alliances, does that mean we have to some extent blend the two, that we need to work with new alliances with a country like Brazil in order to try to get some of those Norwegian values that Gunjuri was talking about into the agendas, that we alone cannot do that?
Yes.
Well, that was short.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think
fantastic.
what we do it today with India on digital,
Right.
global
Yeah.
digital
Exactly.
goods, because they have the technology, maybe also the partnerships in the countries where we are not that strong, because and you know, they have that priority. But we have our model of partnership, or how we do projects, programs, also the long knowledge that we have as NORAD. So. Yeah.
So then you bring us back to a point which is perhaps where we started, which as academics we love coming back to, which is perhaps it's not so new after all. You know, perhaps this is just an evolution of the kinds of processes that we've been in for many decades. But Ole Jakob, quickly, you were going to say.
You mentioned it, but part of the challenge with Norwegian development assistance is that Norway has been thinking of itself as a great power. So if you look at all the issues that we fund, that has to come down to a few rather than 20.
Right.
So we are not a great power, we're not a hegemon, and so thinking in slightly different terms I think will be super important.
Fantastic. Okay, I said I'd come back to all of you for a lightning round. Ole Jakob, you just gave me a one-word answer. I'm now going to ask all of you for a three-word answer. I'll start with you, Maria. Could you give us, please, your 3 words that you think most summarize this moment? You can be creative, poetic, academic. Maria, what would be your 3 words?
Norway's internal flame, and 2-3 words to explain it. I'm drawing inspiration from a confirmation speech I heard and attended this weekend about keeping the youth internal flame, their drive and their beliefs and what they want, the change they want to do in the world. Excellent. Before someone tells them they cannot do it, or before they doubt themselves. So keep
Excellent.
Norway's
Thank
internal
you for those
flame.
3 words. Toril.
If you allow me a hyphen, then I can do it. So, alliances,
Yeah,
governance solutions, and trust.
that was the hyphen.
Yeah.
Alliances, government solutions, trust. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, good news.
Uncertainty, dramatic, and I had trust, so then I can take
You can take trust again.
You can have 2 votes for trust.
Trustworthiness. How about that?
Yeah, or trust decline.
Trust decline, hyphenated.
But I must say, I think just by accident I quoted Shakira wherever earlier, and now she took Bengals. So I mean, this panel is full of surprises.
There we go. Ole Jakob, 3 words.
qualitatively new uncertainty.
Fantastic.
That's the
okay,
word,
that was
isn't it?
and that was almost poetic. Thank you to all of you. These are questions we're working on intensely at PRIO. We have a blog that was just published in advance of this meeting where you can read some of our thoughts being also the work of the Multilateral Affairs Group, which I lead. So please do check that out. Thank you for coming. I hope you have a great Arendals Uke, and remember that things started well. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you very much. It was good. It was a lovely story. Yes. It was a great story.
Shakira, den ligger rett under overflaten, liksom. Ja.
Okay. Right. Thank you so much.
Hallo,
Wonderful.
ja, takk. Yes. Du er på vei. Yes, da skal jeg samle ting, men gjør det. Så da prøver vi å komme bort dit også. Ja, ja. Ja.
Excellent, exciting.